Got some NBA 2K19 here. I'm going to answer another fictional roster video question, and this video comes from Big Man. Shout out to him. His question is there a cap when making creative players with the fictional rosters? Thank you for this question, and the easy answer is I'm not sure. Probably technically there is a cap, but there's definitely a known workaround to where you can create as many players on a roster that you want to create. Um, this was the route that I went. And the reason why I'm not sure, because I feel like when I was creating my fictional rosters, I think I deleted the initial players that I created on the roster, if I'm not mistaken. So, I want to say that I guess the easy answer is no. There is no cap, and I'm going to show you how to create as many players as you want on a fictional roster. So here is the fictional roster that I created. Every NBA team has 8 players on it, and in this situation, I did add probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 300 players or so, maybe 300 players into the free agency pool. The reason why I did this is for if people wanted to use this roster and they wanted to start it up as a fantasy draft, however way that they wanted to do it, they would have the ability to do that. Just by putting the 8 players on the team and having nobody in the free agency pool, you won't be able to start up a fantasy draft or anything like that. You'll just have to start up the roster regularly, which isn't a huge it wasn't a big deal either. But for anyone who wants to start up their season as a fantasy draft, this is the reason why I added so many players into this roster. So as you see, I have a ton of players on this roster, over probably like 500 or so players, and I can still add more players to the roster. The way you would do that is you would save the roster where these players are on. So let's go back to that roster. So you would go in, save this roster, save roster, bam, save the roster. Make sure all the players are either in the free agency pool or on a team. That's the biggest thing. You don't want the players still in your created player pool. So whatever players that you create, make sure that you either put them in free agency or you put them on the roster technically. Put them on a roster technically. So once they're on a roster, they are on that roster. So whoever's in your creative player pool, you would wipe out that creative player pool or delete however many players that you need, and then you would go back in and create the players that you're going to add to the pool. So we're going to add, let's say, 5 players to the pool. To the already created player pool. So here are my 5 players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You would go back to that roster that's already created, fictional roster. And as you see, those 5 players I created are in the created player pool, and then you just copy those players into free agency or whatever you need to copy them to. Copy them to a team in a free agency, and that's how you can add as many players to a roster as possible. So there's an unlimited number of players that you can add into a roster, but I guess, quote unquote, technically there is a cap on how many players that you can create at one time. But after those created players are put onto the roster and saved, you can delete that set of created players. You don't need those players anymore. They're already on the roster. I guess to be safe, you can also share them to make sure that the roster in some way, shape, or form doesn't get corrupted or deleted by accident or something like that. So I would recommend saving and sharing that roster, even if it's not completed, because you can always go back to it, and then wiping out those players before adding them to the roster. So to answer your question, big man, in easiest terms, you can make as many players to a roster as you want. You just have to go through this workaround, but I'm not sure of the technical cap when creating a full when creating all the players in a created player in the created player. I'm not sure how many players you can create in here, but overall, as long as you save the players that you created onto the roster, you can create as many players on a roster that you want. So hopefully that answers your question thoroughly. Definitely leave comments in the comment section below. Any questions that you need answered about fictional rosters or rosters in general, or really anything about NBA 2K, definitely leave that in the comment section below. Thank you for listening. Again, shout out to all the fictional roster creators out there and roster creators around the world. That's all I have for you guys. KC Classic 7 signing out.